cameras. They reveal hidden secrets and stories, and they whisk us away to places we're forbidden to go. For years, one man has used a camera to take us inside a world of heroes, a world that many of us never get to see or truly understand. His work made headlines, yet he himself was never the hero. Emergency responders. They save lives and constantly put themselves in danger to save us. Nobody can really understand the life of a first responder unless they've been one, or unless they've worked with one closely in emergency situations. And today we're speaking with Tom Mann, the host and creator of EmergencyFD Storyline. So great to have you with us, Tom, or should I say I'm with you, because this is your podcast and your project and has been for many, many years. Where did you get the idea for such a concept, to be working with first responders, in particular firefighters?
This goes back to about 1991. I remember when my son was born. For some reason, I got this interest to do something different with video. It started with video, just total video. And I just had an interest. I wanted to see what firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, that whole area, what they did. I wanted to know about that world. I think I got the interest because of the many shows that turned out on TV with law enforcement. I thought, well, maybe you could do that with fire and EMS. That's how it began. And so that was like 1991. And the next step was I went and talked with a friend of mine, a guy named Risa Davis, who's appeared, by the way, on my podcast. His kids were like good friends with me. We grew up down the street. He was the firefighter I knew, the paramedic I knew, this guy. And so I remember I called him up. He was doing some work in my studio as the fire chaplain at that time. And I said, listen, I would like to ride with the firefighters and paramedics, and this was in Memphis. And what do I need to do? He said, well, maybe I can get you to talk to the union president, which I did. I went and sat down with the union president, a guy named Sam Posey at the time. And then he said, you need to talk with Charlie. I said, who's Charlie? He said, Charlie Smith. Charlie Smith is the director of the fire services. I'm like, what's a director? He said, he's in charge. He's underneath the mayor. He's in charge of the whole fire department of Memphis. You need to talk to him. So a couple of weeks later, I wound up in his office.
How much time?
How long do you want?
And I started talking to him and explaining this idea I had. I want to ride around on your fire engines, your fire trucks, and see what you do and film it and turn it into some kind of a documentary. And that's what I was thinking about. Maybe a TV series was my idea. And he thought a moment, and then I thought he was going to say no. Honestly, I did. He thought I was crazy.
I mean, obviously you've worked a lot of years in production for various, major networks and contracting and all sorts of things. Was this just a bit of a pipe dream?
Yeah, it was.
So what was that like for you when he says, well, yeah?
He started thinking, and his idea was, he said, that might be really interesting to share what we do. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to share what you guys do.
You're right, I think people would be shocked at how much we do,
And he said, you know what, I'll let you do it. His words were to me, you got to follow the rules. And if you make me or the department or the firefighters look bad in what you're doing, this deal is over with. But I'll let you do this. Very shortly, within like a week or so, he had me ride with what's called a unit supervisor in charge of the paramedics. And that person took me all around the city. And it was a woman by the name of Jean Coughlin.
You had anything to drink tonight?
Not much.
Not much. He's acting like he's either got a snoot full or he's got his bell rung real hard.
She broke me in very quickly.
What you think you got?
I think God has done let another one be intoxicated and save his life.
I saw things I had never seen, and I think I was bit by a bug at that point. I thought, this is amazing.
Fell down the stairs, hit her head.
Lady over here said she fell downstairs, but she said her husband knocked her down the stairs, so we don't know.
Okay. Unit 4, we need the police on the scene. Unit 4, we have an intoxicated party.
The way it works is the police are on their way, and the only reason they're coming is to help make you go to the hospital.
He'll kill me. Nope.
So they'll have to arrest you to take you to the hospital. If you went willingly with us...
I didn't call.
I know you didn't call, but you're hurt.
All right, let the jaws do the work.
We're gonna need a blanket, cover her up with. Right over there. Come on over here, yeah. That's there, good deal. Be careful, that arm's broke. I'm sorry you're hurting, okay? Then I started thinking, I would love to show this to everybody, what these individuals do. Even that first night, it was a little bit surprising. Total different world. I'd never seen anything like this.
I'm Tom Mann, and for the past number of months, I've spent time documenting the work of these valiant men and women. The story you're about to see is theirs, how they felt, what they saw, and how they fought and won against a 5-alarm fire here on EmergencyFD.
So you're almost 30, not quite, riding fire trucks,
Yeah.
going on these big rides, filming them, but it doesn't stay that way.
It took a little while because you're running around with a camera and sticking in the faces of these first responders, and they're first of all going, "Who are you?" That went on for probably about a year. Who are you? I started riding with these paramedics. This is what I started first, riding on an ambulance.
We're unable to detect a blood pressure. He does not have a radial pulse. He does have a carotid pulse. We're going to have the ETA about 6 minutes.
I would go and ride for 4, 6, 8 hours at a time, and sometimes 12 hours, or maybe a whole shift. And you're sitting there with 2 or 3 individuals, and you're just riding the whole time. They get to know you pretty well. I guess that took about a year. I spent about 2 years trying to figure out how to record it, because this was the days when you had, giant cameras. We're not talking about, now you could take off, I could take off with a GoPro and get better footage than I did back then. Now I had a camera, and you're running around with about a $20,000 camera in 1991, 92, 93. And you're trying to figure out, how do you get the sound and the audio? How do you light it at night? And that was the biggest challenge.
And I can imagine from a production point of view, that would have been very tricky. It's not like you've got other crew to rely on. There's no second camera that you can cut an angle to.
It's me, myself, and I. I had 2 other guys. I had my brother that would come with me on occasion to be a sound guy. And then I had another friend that who I wound up going with New York with, a guy named Richard, that helped me out as well. And he would show up and do some things. And I did even have one of my partners in business that would come out and usually do photos for me. But most of the time, it was me.
So how did you then transfer over to fire trucks?
I had gone to some fire scenes, and those were just amazing to me. I thought, okay, how can I do this better? And first of all, I needed my own equipment. So I went up getting a sponsorship. In fact, behind me, there are these turnout coats, these fire bunker gear that the firefighters wear. Those are actually literally the ones that I got through one company called Morning Pride that supplied them to me. And I just did a couple things for them, and that gave me the freedom to go just about anywhere. And then the second thing was, I wanted, how can I get inside of a burning building?
That's what everyone wants to do,
sure.
surely.
You want to get in a burning building. You want to do that.
Crazy.
Yeah, right. It was a little bit crazy at the time. But I remember I had to go back to Charlie Smith, who was the director of the fire department. I kept sending stuff to him as I was going. He was so patient with me. He said, tell you what, why don't we let you go through some training? And so I went to the training center, and every time they would have air mask training, I would go out there. And they would let me go inside. So I got really used to wearing what's called a self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA, what everybody will call a gas mask, but it's not gas, it's compressed air. But I got used to working with those, and because I had been a competitive swimmer, for me it was like swimming in water, because you don't open your mouth with smoke around, but you don't open your mouth with your underwater. So for me, it was the same thing. It was like scuba diving. There wasn't any difference. Also, when like neighboring fire departments around Memphis would have a controlled burn, what they would do, burn a house back in the day, we did a lot. I would show up, I would call the chiefs and say, hey, do you mind if I come out and film you doing what you're doing? And they said, sure, come on out. So I would come out, and I would go inside and just figure out how to shoot with my camera, learn how to breathe and get used to that. I would spend, sometimes a couple hours, which you really weren't supposed to do, but just I wanted to get so used to it, it was second nature to me, because I wasn't doing every day like firefighters were.
Coming through the door. Man, look at that.
But I did discover one thing. When there were real fire situations, it was unpredictable. I could go inside of a door, and if they said it was okay, I would go into little areas, and they limited what I could do, justifiably so. So if we get a bad situation or we get serious fire, you're going out.
Get out! Get out!
You know, that can get really very quickly out of control. And a lot of times, I learned too, is that when you shoot fire, fire is not bright, it's dark, it's black. You can't see anything. So you can't even see your hand in front of your face. So when you're going in, you can't see anything.
So you've built up this rapport with the firefighters. Did you eventually become part of the team?
I did this for about 10 to 11 years straight with the city of Memphis. And then I worked with another, for instance, I lived in a suburb called Bartlett, and I went with those guys everywhere too. In Germantown, Collierville, all these departments around Memphis, I wound up going to different parts of the country. It was like I was one of them, and they get used to me. A lot of people, many people thought I worked for the fire department. No, I didn't. I was this guy doing this on my own. And then finally, at some point, I wound up being contracted to do projects. Early on, about 2.5 years into it, there was an incident called 750 Adams or Regis Towers. 2 firefighters that I knew, one of them that I knew pretty well, went in and never came out. And a guy named Larry Mathis, a guy named Billy Bridges. And ironically, the week before, we had been riding with Billy Bridges and then Larry Mathis, who I knew. I knew all the crew at this Engine House 7. So first time, I guess, I had experienced 2 other firefighters before that had died, but I didn't go to that scene. This one, I was on the scene when it happened. That changed my outlook on what I was doing. I realized, okay, wait, this isn't a game anymore. And tragedies happen. I wound up being hired to be part of the investigation, which meant I was recording an investigation. I learned about things that other people didn't know. And I was told I couldn't talk to anyone because you're now subject to an investigation. Do you know what that means? And had to be explained what it was what you had to keep confidential. I was hired to do that, again, by Charlie Smith, this director of the fire services. He said, you're going to be working for me. And he said, what you're going to tape the investigation so that people know we're not covering up anything. So I figured out, I really began to understand the power of what I was doing. And then I wound up participating in a big network event after that with a fire television network. And then things began opening up because there are other scenes I went to that were really tragic. And the footage wound up being used to train firefighters. Fire departments were using it for training. And then I would work for these fire and EMS networks, and I would go to an incident and I would wind up capturing pretty dramatic scenes. I felt more a part of them than I did being a part of the media now.
Yeah.
It was really strange. So I actually was not doing any media. Just I had some things with my business going on, but I wasn't on the air anywhere anymore. So it was a different time period for me. I went from being a guy who worked in media all the time to all of a sudden I was working. I felt like one of the members of the fire service, but it was kind of weird because I never touched anything. I didn't do anything, didn't carry a hose, didn't go save anyone. I'm just holding a camera and documenting what they're doing. And today the value of it, I never had any idea that I would sit here 30, 40 years later going, wow, that was a total different time. I documented this whole era of fire service that changed, and you know, it was a really neat moment to be a part of. And at the time I was young, very strong. Firefighters talk about how heavy their gear is. I had, air mask, tank, all the stuff I wore.
And a camera.
And a camera. And my camera was, and the batteries with it. I had a battery on my waist that was about 15, 20 pounds. Then I had the camera, which was another 15, 20, 30 pounds, and all the stuff that went with it. So you're carrying all this stuff.
Probably
I was
the
able to do it.
equivalent to a child almost.
I would say a woman.
Woman.
It was like carrying that all the time, but I could run with it, and I was young, able to do that. I don't know how I did that. Now I look back, I'm like, wow.
I can imagine, you're going in, you're seeing tragedy after tragedy, just like the firefighters are. You mentioned before that you didn't have to do anything, you were just holding a camera.
Yeah.
You've built relationships with these firefighters.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
in situations where sometimes they pass away.
Mm-hmm.
People that 1 week you're riding with them, the next week you're on scene and they go in and their bodies come out.
They would go through something, some event, and they would talk to me about it. Here's the other thing. They started talking to me about it, and it was something horrible. And at the time, you know, I didn't know a lot about post-traumatic stress, but I would see it on their faces. And then I got to understand why they wouldn't talk sometimes. It made sense to me.
So you've pivoted, Tom, between big boys' toys to then seeing your purpose. You're not anymore in the media, you're seeing yourself as one of the fire team. What was that like for you when it started to get real? Paint us a picture of that.
You don't realize how much it shocks you or how it changes you. But from then on, every time I went out with my camera, I thought, this could be the last time I capture this person or record this guy, who usually became a friend, this man or this woman. You know, this could be the last time I'll ever see him. And you start thinking like that. There was a gentleman by the name of Jim Cunningham. He was a legend. He retired. He worked on Engine 7, and this Larry Mathis was his best friend. And I would go ride with Jim. And Jim and his crew, the same Engine 7, but a different shift. And every time I went out there, you know, Jim would talk about his friend Larry, and who was the firefighter that had died. And that's what he talked about all the time. But every time I went out there, I thought, you know, what they were doing. I can remember going up some stairs with them and into a high-rise, similar situations, and thinking, you know, this could happen right now in front of me, that somebody could pass away, somebody may not make it back, and I'm here with them. You could say in a way, yeah, it was still exciting, but it became a mission. And the other thing in my head, that's when I started thinking about, you know, this stuff that I'm doing could really help prevent something again. And that was the thing. I started working on projects that I would call that would help prevent another incident or another firefighter death, or even a death of just a civilian. That was the thing that changed for me.
Did you ever feel helpless?
There was a side of me I didn't feel helpless because I was with professionals that knew what they were doing. So if that side of it, I didn't feel helpless. The side of, you know, deep inside the emotions of it, I guess in a way, somewhat you did. And you couldn't really talk to anybody about it. I didn't know who to talk to or anything.
Did you ever feel like you wanted to jump in and help?
Yeah. If something was really bad, I'd put the camera down. There were moments where I didn't want to do what I was doing. I felt bad because I couldn't do anything. The one time that I felt really bad was when there was a gentleman went to a car fire. This was a big car fire. Car had been burning for 4 or 5 minutes. We didn't know anybody was inside. So I get there and I'm filming the car. I thought, get the firefighters knocking down the car. That's cool.
Yeah.
I was going to another fire. And all of a sudden there's a man inside. And he's still alive. He has no face, no eyes, no anything. And I remember putting my camera down, and then this guy who's the head, who's called a unit supervisor in charge of the paramedics, I mean, he looked at me and he said, keep it rolling. And I'm like, I was shaking my head like, I don't want to. And he was like, keep it rolling. And he said the word training. And I remember the scene we were looking at was so bad. I felt bad, but then it's like kicked in, okay, they're doing their job, I'm gonna do something. So my focus did start shifting, not toward the general public and seeing what they did, but that's when I started thinking, I can really help them with what they do. And ironically, that incident was publicized all over the country in the US way back in the day, and it was a very dramatic situation. And I got to interview the people I was working with on the scene, and they discussed it. And I even put that in one of my early podcasts, the EmergencyFD Storyline. One of the young, new firefighters, that was one of his first scenes, to see somebody die and somebody burning to death. And he talks about that, how bad that was. Even to this day, many have seen that scene, I mean, so many years later.
And so there was a point that you had to hang up the cameras, you had to stop. working with the firefighters. Tell us a little bit about what happened in that situation and what that meant for you, because the dream didn't die of helping first responders.
I did this for such a long time. So here we are, I guess, almost 9-10 years into it. Two things that happened. I went to New York, got the opportunity to ride with New York City Fire Department. There were a lot of things changing in the fire service. They'd had the first World Trade Center bombing, and after the first World Trade Center bombing, there were individuals that were still there. And I rode with this, I think he was a battalion chief in New York City, and I remember riding with him, and I did a piece on this. Took me to the World Trade Center one day. We just went there, he and the chauffeur, the guy that drove him, we went there, and I can remember him talking about, because he had been at the first Trade Center bombing, told us how it didn't work. And then he began describing in front of the World Trade Center, looking up, I didn't capture this on video, but he told me, all they have to do is get a tanker truck up on the top of that thing and light that thing up, and these buildings will come down like pancakes. And he said, less than an hour. He was describing what happened on 9/11.
Wow.
This was like 4 or 5 years before that, and I heard that. That was in my head the whole time. I've been working with some other projects on weapons of mass destruction and learned about a lot of things I didn't want to know about, and I learned. I went to so many things, saw so many things. The last one that was really hard on me, and I didn't know how bad it was, what you call, a mass shooting incident, which you hear about today. And what happened was that 2 firefighters were killed on the scene of a mass shooting, a sheriff's deputy, another woman. I remember about the training center. I'd been contracted by the city of Memphis at that point. I was kind of working for them. And I heard what happened, and I came in the room, and I remember there were 2 individuals that had been at that first fire, 750 Adams, that they were a key part of. And they were in the training center, and these 2 grown men had tears in their eyes, and I heard them say, I can't go down there. They were supposed to be going down there to videotape.
Yeah.
There's like 3 of us that were doing this stuff, and they were saying, I can't do this, and they were actually crying. He said, I can't do this. I can't go through this again, because we knew there were 2 firefighters that were DOA at the time. And I just said, I'll go down there, and I went down there, and I saw a scene I never will forget, and I went there, and there were 2 firefighters that died. I knew of them. I didn't know them that closely, but I knew who they were. And everybody there, it was a really tough scene. And then I wound up, I was told, hey, will you capture all the kind of forensics of the scene? There may be 2 kids in the house. We're looking for their bodies. And so I remember with these, with a camera, looking for them in their ashes. They had some investigators trying to find that. And I remember one point, I was told to stay in this garage where this woman was, and she had been shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And she had bled out, and she was sitting there. And to be honest with you, I could smell the blood. And there was so much blood in that room. And she was a young lady, probably not much older, much younger than I was. And her life had just ended just within an hour or 2 before that. It was weird to sit there, but I had to sit there 25 minutes in that room with that young lady. That was really hard, because it was just a tragic situation. And you see those things, and to this day I smell. It sounds bad, but the blood was so. It was so much that I smell it, and just like I can smell the guy who was burning in that car, the senses come back. And when that happened, I remember I got very numb, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't know, but I was kind of like, okay, I think I've seen enough. Mm-hmm. I got where I didn't really want to do it anymore. It really bothered me. And I'd done all these other things that were really fun and incredible. But that was the tough side of it. I guess if I describe it, I had seen as much as most firefighters see in a lifetime in just a few short years, and some never see. Some have never seen the things that I've seen. And it was kind of like, as somebody, I heard a combat cameraman, like in Vietnam, I heard him talk about that, how he went to firefight after firefight after firefight. He even wound up picking up a gun and defending himself. And I heard that, and he said, you become one of them, but you're not, but you experience everything. And I saw and experienced some really tough stuff. Never forgot that. It stayed with me.
Did you ever think, after you hung up the boots, so to speak, that you would end up back working with firefighters, but this time on a podcast?
No. And that was a little bit of a journey. I went through 10 years after those incidences. I was working on a documentary for a network, one that you and I worked together at. And I remember I was doing the same things I was doing before, but I wasn't, the firefighters, none of that was involved. But I remember I started having dreams and things like that, and then that's when all this stuff came up. And I had to go through a program with post-traumatic stress, and that's what they said it was. I'm like, I don't know, I never touched anything, never did anything. And finally we discovered what it was, and I went through that, that helped. But I didn't think I would do this again. What happened was my son became a volunteer firefighter.
Wow.
And I was like, oh man, I knew he was the type of person that would be good at this. He was, for many reasons. But when he started, I started thinking about it again. And I remember I would go to things that he was involved with. I would tape some things he was involved with. I started a YouTube channel and started putting my old stuff out. And I thought, this is really amazing, kind of this stuff I did. I thought, wow, that was a lot of stuff. And I never kind of finished what I was doing, and I always felt like it was a little bit incomplete. That happened, and then it kept growing and growing. And I had met you. You talked about podcasts. You got me involved with a podcast you were involved with. What's a podcast? That's my favorite line. You told me about that. I thought, you know what? I would love to go back and tell some of these stories in audio, first of all, but then I'd love to do it in video. And somehow I thought, well, I'm going to go back and film these guys, but then COVID hit.
Yeah.
Everything I was wanting to do with video, I'm like, okay, put it on hold. I'd left a TV job and it's messed everything up. So all my plans were gone on that. So I started doing audio with it and recording audio. And in the process, that has really grown. And it was amazing because I was telling these stories, told these stories and of these guys, many of them that I had done all this work with. And now they're like me. They're 30 years later, they're older guys. But I noticed that it was making a difference with some of the younger men and women. But at the same time, I realized the power that you can have in helping individuals, especially in the fire service.
What are some of the responses, Tom, that you've had from first responders and firefighters that have heard the podcast?
I'm glad I listened to that, or I'm glad I watched that, because I know I'm not alone. That's one thing. Other responses are, I really needed to hear that. And we're talking about, this is not just from the rank and file, but sometimes it's a fire chief, a guy who's, man or a woman, who's in charge of everything. I needed to hear that. I'm glad I heard that. Or that gave me some great ideas. The biggest one to me is that I was ready to hang it up. And they weren't talking necessarily about their career. Sometimes that's what it was, but usually they're talking about their lives. When they tell you that they heard something, they're not alone, and they don't want to end their life, you begin to realize how important what you're doing is. And I've watched my own son experience dramatically the post-traumatic stress, the issues, because he's been one of the best. He's been a special operator in the fire service and things like that. And I've watched him go through that. He still goes through that. And I realize it's important. It's important to tell stories. It's important to let, first responders know they're not alone and that people do care. And by the way, you can get help and you do something unique. It's valued and you can make it through it.
If somebody's maybe listening right now that's maybe a first responder, or maybe they used to be, what's the best way that they can help you to help them?
One thing is listen, subscribe, follow all these things. You find them on all these platforms, the podcast, any video things that we're working on, do that. Another way, even help fund what we do. We're trying to do a lot of crowdfunding. That makes a big difference.
Because you actually don't get paid to do
this.
This is something you do to serve their community.
We're seeking sponsors, we're seeking everything, but it costs money to do it. And that really is helpful to me. and to continue what I do. Because to me, it's a passion. I think when you do purpose, I think people come alongside you and they believe in what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing now. I am more interested in the lives of these individuals and that they have a healthy mindset and have a healthy life.
Because you understand the repercussions of everything that goes on with that. Tom, it's been great talking with you today, and I'm so proud of you as your friend to be able to just get the word out about the incredible impact that EmergencyFD Storyline has had and continues to have, and I wish you all the very best moving forward.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it.
Find EmergencyFD Storyline on various podcast platforms or go to our website emergencyfd.com.